Wonderful. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar. I'm going to pull up my slides now, and thank you to Kate and Medmark for participating in this. I will keep my part very short, but quickly want to introduce everybody to LSN and our upcoming Resi conferences if you don't already know us. This webinar is going to focus on identifying top product liability risks, and then most importantly, how do you mitigate those? So it is well beyond my area of expertise, but what I can tell you is at LSN and with our Resi conferences, we're really good at fundraising. And so we have two upcoming shows, Resi San Diego and Resi Boston in September, that will be taking place. Resi is the in-person accumulation of all of our partnering. And so we're really looking forward to these shows. Resi San Diego will have about 300 investors in person. I know many of the medical device companies may be out in San Diego for Boston or may be out in San Diego for bio already. However, if you're looking to expand your BD efforts and also prioritize fundraising, especially as a medical device company, while bio can tend to be very therapeutic focused, Resi gives you a perfect opportunity to connect with early stage investors that are actually a fit for your product, stage of development, modality, indication, and all of the above. Um, and so I've gone a little bit ahead of myself, but at LSN, again, what we do is we specialize in helping early stage companies fundraise. And so I use the term early stage relatively loosely. For me, that defines really anything from seed through Series B. So seed 1 to 2 million, Series A 2 to 10, Series B 10 to 50. If you fall well within that sweet spot, it tends to align not only with the companies that we have coming through our Resi conferences, but most importantly, both the investors at the conference as well as the database. So at the core of LSN, we really are a data company. We have built and curated an investor database of both capital investors and strategic in licensors. That database houses information on over 4,000 global investors and spans 10 different categories of investors. So everything from corporate venture, strategics, pharma, medtech, angels, family offices, you name it. We track 10 different categories of investors, both within our investor database, as well as we have a version of which that actually integrates directly into the Salesforce CRM. So if you're looking to also manage your investor outreach, that's a really good way to do so. The next column that we see here is the Resi conference. And so that seems to be what we are most well known for nowadays. And we put a big focus, and I can brag about this because I have nothing to do with the investor recruitment, but a big focus on vetting our investors. And so if you're an early stage fundraising company and you now need to go out and raise capital and play the numbers game, what you need to do is identify all of the investors that are in scope for what you do and then go talk to them. And it is a lot easier said than done. But at Resi, we put on the event 5 times a year and we bring 50% entrepreneurs, 50% investors. So if you can come with us to San Diego in June, we'll be in Boston in September, and then we always start the year at Resi JP Morgan in San Francisco every January, where last year we had 850 investors. But if you can come with us to a number of events, you've now had, 20, 40, 60, 80 investor meetings over the course of 6 months, which is a lot, but that is what it takes to be successful in the world of fundraising. And so our investor team is very thorough, not only in bringing the investors to the conference, but also in vetting them. And so for every investor we have at the event, they have actually gone through a one-on-one interview with our investor relations team to, one, ensure that they are a legitimate investor, but also we get to find out exactly where their thesis looks to invest. So we know what modalities, what indications, what check size, geography, and all of this key criteria that we use to both populate the partnering platform at Resi, as well as go back and curate the database, like I've said earlier. And so that information allows you to be very targeted in your outreach and actually identify the right investors. And the last component we have here is LSN Labs, which serves as our education and hands-on support. Through LSN Labs, we've launched a product called BD Assist, where we will actually go in and we will curate a agentic global target list of investors that you should be reaching out to, and then do the outreach on your behalf. And so we can set up meetings for you, and then the company can just go and take the meetings. We also have an AI agent that assesses company fundraising readiness. And this is a completely free report, so if anybody is out there that is interested in doing it, please fill out the report. I'll make sure that a link to the report actually gets sent out in the follow-up from this webinar. And then we also offer both entrepreneurial education and, like this, many free educational workshops and boot camps. And so the last thing that I will say is if you are interested in signing up specifically for Resi San Diego, partnering is now live. And so we're about 2 weeks out, which is when a majority of the meetings get booked. So if you're interested, maybe you're going to be in San Diego already. We're going to have 300 investors there. Partnering is open. You can go in and get access today and start setting up meetings. And the good news too is I also have discount codes. And so if you scan the QR code on the right side of the screen, you'll see the discount codes just above it, but it will give you the opportunity to sign up for either Resi San Diego, Resi Boston, or we also have a bundle rate for both. And so you'll have a discounted rate to come and partner with the many investors that we'll have there. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Kate Klaus from Medmark, who is kind enough to take part in this webinar and has a lot of information to give you guys. So thank you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Max.
And Kate, I'm going to stop sharing my screen too so you can pull yours up.
Perfect. Let me do that now.
And just as a reminder, the last thing I'm going to say is this webinar is being recorded. And so within the next few days, we will also be sure to send out both the link to that company fundraising assessment, as well as the recording and any follow-up notes.
Great. Okay. I will also say that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A panel. It may be under the More tab at the bottom of your screen. It's the circle with 3 dots in it. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in there. I will see them, and then we can talk a bit more about any questions that you have. My name is Kate Klaus. I am a senior risk management attorney and FDA specialist with Medmark. Medmark is a product liability insurance company specifically for the life sciences industry. If you're going to be attending any of the Resi meetings in person, please do look out for my colleagues who will be in attendance there. They're glad to answer any insurance questions that you may have. And today we are going to be talking about product liability risks for medtech startups. So we're going to look at identifying some of the common risks and then mitigating those risks. Brief disclaimer. We'll also say that nothing here should be considered legal advice. This is my opinion. And let's get started. So I wanted to group some of these risks in the areas where they typically overlap. So looking at core product risks, these are your typical product liability risks that you see: design, manufacturing, and warning defects. I also wanted to look at some of the things that happen in the product life cycle. So clinical testing and your quality management system, post-market surveillance, how risks can arise there, and as well as business and operational risks, your supply chain, your regulatory history, and your activity in the commercial market. So we'll take a look at each of these and talk about how these risks arise, how we can identify them, and how we can prevent them. So starting off with our core product risks, design defects. What is a design defect? This is something that is an inherent flaw in the design of the product that is going to render it unsafe, even if it's made perfectly to its specifications. There is something in the specs that makes the product unreasonably unsafe. Ways that we can evaluate whether there is a product defect is to consider one of 2 tests, and depending upon the jurisdiction, the courts use both of these tests in different areas of the country. So we can look at whether the product is performing as an ordinary consumer would reasonably expect, or is there something that's different about this product that it's not meeting what the state of the art is, and that's making it unsafe. We would also look at, is there a safer and economically feasible alternative to this design issue? Is there something that could be added, an additional security measure that would prevent this risk? How can you identify a potential design defect in a product? And it really is product specific, but in general, you're going to be looking at what are competitor products doing? What is the state of the art for the market? is there a safety feature that has been added to another similar product that you've chosen not to use for some reason? And if you have chosen not to use it, is there some sort of justification for that? It's critical to look at a human factors analysis as well. It's interesting. Sometimes we will meet with our clients, and their product is their baby. They know it inside and out, and they think that it is the most logical presentation. That the user interface could not be simpler. But they've never put it in front of someone cold and watched them play with the product and try to figure it out. And it can be eye-opening for them when they actually look at a human who hasn't been involved in the design process interacting with it. And so it's a really good way to get an idea of, where is the average person going to go, and where are those unknown hazards. Clinical testing is another way that you can identify potential design issues. A lot of times, particularly with devices, we see a lot of bench testing, but actually testing the clinical operation and looking at the accuracy of what the product is doing, looking at how the users are interacting with the product, that can give you a lot more insight into your design, and if there's something that needs to be fixed or tweaked or added to make the product safer. And if we've identified a design defect, how do we mitigate against this risk? The first thing is your design itself. Can you change it in a way that is reasonable, and makes it better, makes it safer? If not, then you have to go to your instructions for use and your warnings, and you have to provide sufficient information to the users so that they can safely use your product, and avoid things that are inherently dangerous in the product. It is the developer, the manufacturer of the device, that really has all of the information about this particular product, and it is incumbent on you to give that information to the users so that they can use the product as intended. It's important to look at ways that the product could potentially be misused and caution against that as well. Moving on to manufacturing defects. A manufacturing defect is a lot simpler. It is an instance of the product deviating from its specifications due to some sort of error in the manufacturing process. There are a lot of ways that these products can be identified and often prevented. It's through things like incoming material testing. So if you are ordering off-the-shelf components from a supplier, are you doing a 100% inspection of those products? Are you sampling? Is your sampling methodology a validated methodology? How well can you ensure that the materials you're using are meeting all of their specifications before they're being incorporated into your product? In-process testing is another really important phase in the manufacturing process to ensure that the products are meeting all of their specs. If you are, as they're going through the manufacturing process, double checking all of the work that has been done and the functionality, any electronic connections, all of this can prevent functionality issues once the product makes it out into the market. Release testing, of course, is critical. It is ensuring that the product is meeting all specs, that everything is functioning appropriately. Sometimes there's 100% inspection, sometimes there is sampling. And again, the methodology that is used is, it's critical to choose the right method. For a lot of devices, particularly ones that have either life-supporting, life-sustaining functions, or they are invasive devices, things used in surgical procedures, it's important to do the most inspection that you can Uh, there will always be circumstances where 100% doesn't necessarily make sense, and sampling is necessary. But if it is feasible, inspecting every piece is the preferred approach. How do you mitigate the risk of manufacturing defects? First of all, adequate staffing is really a necessity. It's not something where you can substitute AI for your quality staff. We are seeing this more frequently. There are, in companies where funding is a challenge, or they are starting to ramp up operations. There's a temptation to control that resource allocation and use AI if possible. But it's really important to remember that AI cannot be trusted at this point in time. Everything has to be verified by a human. So, staffing by qualified people, well-trained people it's critical. Managing any third parties you're operating that are participating in your operations is another important way to mitigate risk. Looking at your supply chain and any qualification that you have done of those companies. Are you visiting their sites? Are you discussing, their operations, their regulatory history with them, particularly in the case of contract manufacturers and critical suppliers? You want to have an understanding of how these companies are operating and learning how you can trust their operations to incorporate their important activities into your own product. It's also really important to focus on how the manufacturing process is going to change, how your SOPs are going to be tested as you're scaling up operations. An SOP that was drafted for a much smaller operation may not be able to stand up to the challenge presented by a drastic increase in demand. So ensuring that you have enough employees, that they are trained on SOPs to ensure that they are putting out accurate products, cross-training on various aspects of the manufacturing process so that you have redundancy, and that they're able to, verify work that may have been done in another step. All of that can give you a more comprehensive manufacturing process and operation of your quality management system as it pertains to the manufacturing process. As we'll talk about later, when we see claims and injuries and product defects arise, it is typically from some sort of systemic issue rather than just a one-off mistake. So making sure that the policies and the procedures that you have in place are appropriate for your operations is one of the best measures that you can implement to mitigate your risk. Moving on to warning defects. A warning defect is when there is a product that is rendered dangerous because the user does not have enough information, whether it is about how to use it or about product hazards that can arise if they were to misuse it in some way. How can you identify what these necessary instructions and warnings should be? Your label development process is really important. It is when you take everything that you've learned throughout the product development process, any clinical testing, human factors testing, market analysis, and you put it all together to create the labeling for your product. All of this should give a comprehensive picture of what the product can do, what are the expectations for the product, how is the user supposed to use it, what do they need to know to understand if they're a good fit for this particular product, when should they not use it, and what do they need to think about, be cautioned against for the operation of the product. It's important to remember that the product label, the carton the product comes in, the package insert, whatever it may be, That is not the extent of labeling. You need to do a comprehensive analysis of all of the product information that is out there. So it is not just your product label or your carton or your package insert. It's your embedded content in any software that may be part of it. So any prompts or questions that are asked as the device is in operation. If it has to be installed, it's your installation guide. If it has to be maintained or serviced, it's those instructions as well. It is any sales literature that you are creating. It is anything that your sales reps say. And it can be information that is in social media as well. So there is this broad picture of labeling that gives both the claims about the product and the potential risks associated with the product. And your liability in this area can be judged based on the information that is in any part of what is considered labeling. Moving on to life cycle risks. One of the areas where we see a lot of risks in product liability is clinical testing, and the risks arise in two different areas. The first is with the clinical trial itself and conducting your clinical trials. So there are inherent risks to any investigational product, but it is important as the trial is designed and a protocol for testing is developed to identify the risks as best you can with an investigational device and to provide adequate informed consent to any subject who is participating in the trial. It's also important that the subjects understand that as much information as may be in the informed consent, that this is an investigational device and you don't know everything about it yet. So there may be risks that are unknown to the company at that time. If during the course of a trial, additional risks are identified that subjects may need to know about, it may be necessary at some point to reconsent everybody if there's something critical that they need to know. The design of a clinical trial and the protocol itself can, even if it is followed to the letter, there may be injuries. These injuries have to be reported in a timely manner to regulatory authorities. It's also possible that an investigator or site may fail to follow the protocol, which can also drive risk. And in the event of your clinical trial design, if it fails to give you a full picture of the risks associated with a product, that can create risk in another way for your future commercial product. If you haven't asked all of the right questions, then you may not have all of the necessary information to draft appropriate instructions for use and warnings later on. And in that event, it is possible that there could be unknown hazards to the user that could arise or could result in a product liability claim. So it's important to review your protocol to determine if you're asking all of the right questions to assess the actual use risks and identify all potential hazards associated with the product. How do we mitigate risk when it comes to clinical testing? So looking at our two spheres of concern, first, our clinical trial planning. It's really important to look at your protocol and to develop it in conjunction with a respected IRB, Institutional Review Board, as well as consider the use of CSOs and CROs, so contract site organizations and research organizations. These entities are specialists in conducting clinical trials and can assist you in both the demands of running the trial as well as all of the logistics in the development process and making sure that all of the steps are followed appropriately, all of the obligations are met. it is really important to develop a comprehensive informed consent document. Again, this should be reviewed by an IRB prior to its use. And another thing that is important to consider with counsel is whether you should record your informed consent session. If there is an injury associated with a clinical trial and the injured subject later claims that they wouldn't have participated had they known XYZ about the trial, it can be useful in some circumstances to have on record the fact that they had this discussion with the investigator who was consenting them. They asked these questions, they were answered, the risks were presented, and they chose to participate anyway. It may not be appropriate in all circumstances, which is why it's important to discuss with your own attorney. Contracts. This is maybe the first time I'm mentioning contracts, but not the last. Contracts are one of the most important things one of the most important tools you have with regard to risk mitigation. And what you're doing in a contract is ensuring that each of the parties is assuming responsibility for any claims or injuries that arise from their own actions or negligence. You always want to see bilateral indemnification. So each party is taking responsibility for their own actions or negligence. And it's really important to ensure that both parties have a requirement to carry insurance to meet any indemnification obligation they have. When you were talking about a clinical testing or a clinical trial agreement, you are going to have an agreement with the principal investigator as well as the site, and you want to ensure that that bilateral indemnification includes indemnification of the sponsor in the event that there is some sort of willful misconduct on the part of the investigator or the site, or any deviation from the protocol. You've designed your protocol with purpose. So if they are deviating from it and there's no medical justification and some sort of claim arises, that really should be on the investigator and the site. When you have your clinical trial, it's been conducted, you have your data, and you're conducting the analysis, you really want to get a sense of, whether your protocol had addressed all of the design inputs and outputs and given you the information that you need to understand all of the operational mechanisms and potential hazards associated with the product. In addition to your own product data, you want to look at the known risks associated with similar products. And this is something that you can find even in FDA's database. It's the TPLC, or Total Product Life Cycle. You can search by product code, and it will tell you all of the product problems that have occurred, as well as patient injuries that have occurred for products in that particular product code. And so if you're understanding that, guide wires break, sometimes if the guide wires break, they have to, a surgical procedure might have to become an open procedure so that they can go retrieve the piece of the wire that was lost. Those kinds of things are captured in FDA's database. You see the number of times that has occurred for each of the various product problems and patient injuries. So you can see, this is known about this product code. Am I capturing this in my instructions for use and my warnings? Another thing to consider is when you are conveying those risks to the prescriber or the user, you have to consider your audience. So if you're selling an over-the-counter product, have you drafted your instructions and your warnings for an average lay user versus if you are preparing labeling for a prescription device, your label only needs to be drafted in a manner that is suited to the average prescriber of this type of product, the average medical professional using this type of product. So there is a very different level of information and the way that it is conveyed when you're looking at prescription versus over the counter. Finally, in your analysis, you need to look at if there were any unexpected outcomes. And if so, what were the causes? What can you learn about the product or the trial itself from these unexpected outcomes? And do these unexpected outcomes create a need to add additional warnings or instructions, or even modify your design? Moving on to quality management systems. A well-designed QMS is both a mitigation tool and an early warning system. So the quality management system regulations created by FDA are an umbrella framework where FDA has identified all of these operational areas where things can go wrong and where things need to be scanned to ensure that safe and consistent products are being designed and produced and released onto the market. But it is up to every individual company to draft the individual SOPs that make up their quality management system to tailor it to their operations. And that is a really challenging thing to do, to look at your operations and reduce it to SOPs that make sense for your employees, that they're not these, many page manuals when it needs to be clear and concise for each SOP that is in the QMS. The goal is to ensure that you have systematic operational functioning of the company through every phase, from design and procurement to manufacturing, QA, and management oversight. It's important to listen to what your QMS is telling you if there are any deviations. These are your early warnings. If you can catch and correct any failures to comply with SOPs before products reach the market, that is a huge step in terms of mitigating risk. You're preventing any products that are failing to meet their specs from actually entering the market. Also, catching trends in deviations and complaints allows you to identify the root causes of whatever is going wrong with the product and implementing a corrective action, as well as verifying the effectiveness of that corrective action. Have you gotten to the true root cause? Have you created a corrective action, a solution for that problem that is working to fix that root cause? A lot of times it is training. Sometimes it is the process itself. Sometimes it is oversight. Sometimes it is something like staffing. If CAPAs are hanging open for far longer than they should be, does that mean that there isn't sufficient staff to both implement the corrective action, verify that it's been done, and close it out to tick all of those boxes if they're too overwhelmed with additional work? And finally, management oversight is very important for the operation of the quality management system as well. It's important to have those management reviews on a regular basis to allow management to allocate resources in a manner that is going to support the safety of the product that you're putting out. It's important for them to know that if you don't have enough manufacturing staff, for example, and people are rushing through the manufacturing process and mistakes are being made, that's something they need to know. If you have a lack of quality staff and maybe you are not conducting all of the in-process or release testing, if you're sampling when your goal was 100% testing, these are things that are important from a strategic planning perspective, and the management team should be aware of. It's also on them when FDA comes to the door and says that they want to inspect if things have, if the company is not in compliance with regulations, it is on the management to answer all of those questions. They need to know what's going on before those questions are posed to them. Any inspection will go a lot better if that's the case. Post-market surveillance. So product problems and failures are just a reality, but in order to face and address that reality, we have to follow the products once they're out on the market. Things like complaint handling are very important. It's not just a regulatory obligation. It is also how you are going to understand what the adverse events occurring are. You determine at that point whether you have to report the adverse event to FDA. It allows you to trend the reporting that you're getting in from users of the product so that you can maybe identify unknown risks or potential defects. If that's the case, you can begin an investigation into any product problems or failures and ensure that you have a solution that has been implemented that is going to get to that root cause and ensure that devices going forward will not have the same issues. It's also really important because sometimes products are too unsafe to remain on the market for whatever the underlying reason. And it becomes necessary to either remove the product from the market or to conduct some sort of corrective action. Either of which is considered a recall. So for some products, they may be able to stay in place where they are, and you can send, a repair kit or an additional warning about the product, something that doesn't require taking it back. For other products, if there's like a contamination issue or something like that, it's necessary to bring the product back and ensure that you've gathered everything that's out there, you've notified everyone who has received the product, and pulled it back from the market and destroyed any non-conforming or otherwise problematic material. This is another reason why your QMS is so important, because there should be SOPs in there that allow you to track every bit of your incoming component inventory into the finished products that are distributed. So if you are notified by someone upstream in your supply chain that, they have syringes with a contamination issue, and you're making pre-filled syringes using their syringes, then maybe it was addressed by your own sterilization procedures before you distribute your product, but it's something that you need to know about materials that you have been using. So all of that record keeping is part of your quality management system, and it allows you to conduct things like post-market surveillance in a way that gathers the most information, the most useful information. And again, if there are any questions as we are going through this, please do feel free to pop them into the Q&A, and I'm glad to address any questions. And finally, operational risks. So your supply chain is one of the most critical areas of your entire business. You need to have suppliers you can trust. And it can sometimes be a challenge to do that, particularly if you are sourcing material from overseas. It may not be possible to conduct a site visit to their facility. And so you're relying on different data to get an understanding of the operations of that company. It is another reason why contracting is so important as well. because there are all of these exposures that are created throughout the supply chain, and risk needs to be shifted appropriately. So product liability risks extend throughout the entire supply chain itself. So it's not just your spec developers and manufacturers. It's also component suppliers. It is distributors of the product, any logistics operations. So warehousing can have product liability risk. Any importers of product can have product liability risk. And frequently, if you are an initial importer of a product, oftentimes companies don't realize that they are essentially stepping into the shoes of the manufacturer for US purposes. So there is, even as an initial importer of a finished good, you have an obligation to register with FDA, even though you're just a distributor inside of the US. If you're the importer of record, you are stepping into the shoes of the manufacturer for FDA purposes. Independent sales reps can also have product liability risk. Frequently in the ortho space, if they are present in the OR setting, they are both a walking label as well as sometimes participating in problematic, overreaching requests by the surgeons frequently. So asking these sales reps to do more than they technically should. So we will get to that in a minute, but it is something to be aware of if you are going to be using sales reps in the future, that there are unique risks posed by their function. So what are the common exposures that we see with regard to supply chain? First, if a supplier is providing you with a defective component, you should have some sort of recourse if that defect is discovered upon incoming screening. If it is not identified when the component is received and it eventually ends up incorporated into a finished good, perhaps because of the type of component, maybe it's not something that would be opened during the manufacturing process. It might be like something that's added as a kit component. There may be more direct liability for the supplier in that case, and it is critical to capture that in your contract. One of the bigger mistakes that we see is when companies are operating with basically just terms and conditions on a purchase order. That is really insufficient. You want a contract that is tailored to the two parties. It is signed by both parties, and it contains a lot more information that is just in boilerplate terms and conditions. Again, things like your bilateral indemnification and your requirement that each party carry its own product liability insurance policy. Another exposure is with incoming inspections. Again, if these are inadequate and they don't catch any supplier defects, and then products or defective components are incorporated into the finished good, that can create a risk of future product problems or injuries. So again, our risk mitigation, we want to think about contracts. This is incredibly important, as well as, and particularly for startups, if you are relying on contract manufacturers, understanding what the quality requirements are for each company is important. So if you are developing your own product, you are the spec developer, but you're outsourcing the manufacturing to a CMO. In your manufacturing and supply agreement, there should also be a quality matrix or even a separate quality agreement where all of the quality and regulatory obligations are set out in a table where each party assumes responsibility for each of these actions, so that it's very clear when a product or a problem arises later that is linked to a particular quality obligation. you can see which, or potentially both, party is responsible for this deficiency that led to an injury. Finally, your regulatory history is another really important thing to consider. And it can be a challenge for companies that are newer to the market because it always seems like compliance with FDA regulations is, that's your goal. You want to comply. You want to draft your policies and procedures, your entire quality system, so that it meets all of FDA's requirements. But what companies often do not understand is that compliance with FDA regulations is just the baseline for participation in the industry. You are actually looking to meet or exceed whatever the industry standard is. It should not be just compliance with FDA regulations. You have to do it, but that isn't actually a defense in the event of a product's liability claim that you met FDA regulations. So you need to think about how your regulatory history can impact your overall exposure when it comes to product liability risk. Within 30 days, I believe, of commercialization, companies are required to register their establishment with FDA and to provide a list of any products that they're going to be selling. And we are seeing an unusual uptick in companies that are claiming they're going to opt out of FDA regulation. That's just not a thing. So it's really concerning to us on the product liability side when we see companies that have just chosen not to register with FDA for some reason. If you are selling a product that meets the definition of a drug or a device or a supplement or a cosmetic or anything else that falls within FDA's jurisdiction, you are obligated in the United States to comply with FDA regulations, including registration and listing. There has been a large increase in companies that are trying to use wellness as a loophole for compliance with regulations, saying that the FDA created a guidance document for low-risk devices used for general wellness purposes. And this was to prevent things like, pedometers and Fitbits and all of these, like the wearables that have become more and more popular, from having to go through the regulatory process when it really wasn't necessary. But even wearables that are for general wellness, if they have some sort of medical component, those medical components are still subject to FDA regulations. So later editions of the Apple Watch that have pulse oximeters built in and heart monitoring functions built in, those are medical devices that require clearance of 510Ks before they can hit the market. So there is some gray area with wellness products, but not as much as companies are trying to use. And this is going to be important for them down the line if there are any issues with their products later. Because if you do have a failure to comply with FDA regulations, it makes those claims almost impossible to defend because you're not meeting the baseline for participation in the industry. In addition to just registering your company, some devices, depending upon their risk level, require either clearance of a 510K or approval of a PMA, a pre-market application, by FDA prior to marketing. Sometimes it's unclear where your product falls in the classification paradigm, just because maybe it's a novel product, or maybe it doesn't present as much risk as the the classification FDA provides might seem. So in those cases, it is possible to submit what is called a 513G to FDA. It's a request for information from FDA to say, like, how would you classify this? If you have a truly novel but low risk product, you can also file a de novo with FDA where you are requesting a full review of your new product that you don't think meets the threshold for a PMA, a pre-market application. Also important to consider is your inspection history. So after you've registered with FDA, you're beginning your operations, you're selling product. Once FDA knows about you because you've registered, you are on their radar for potential inspections where they will come in, they will look at your physical plant, they will review all of your records, all of your SOPs, and they will give you either a clean bill of regulatory health or they will give you a list of violations. And if you get a list of violations, it's a matter of public record. As is every inspection they conduct. So they have a full database. You can go in and say, I visited ABC company on this date and it was a clean inspection, they had some issues, or they had some serious issues that require official action. And it will tell you what the specific regulations were that were violated. Adverse event reports are another way that anyone can see how your products are functioning. So there is a public database on FDA's website where every adverse event that is reported can be searched. It can be searched by company, by product, by date. You get a narrative about what the complaint was and the reason for this complaint to have been filed. Also, any product recalls, there's a database for recalls. You can see which company was recalling, why, how many units, where they were recalled. All of that is public. And finally, warning letters. So if you have an inspection where the investigators say, this is presenting serious risk, we need to take official action here. If the company's response to that inspection, to that 483, is insufficient, they may get a warning letter from FDA, which is an official enforcement action that lists out the violations and mandates that you present a corrective action plan within 15 business days. All of these letters are public as well. So why does this matter? We have an incredibly well-organized plaintiffs bar in the US, and they are constantly trolling for plaintiffs. There are TV ads all the time. I'm sure we're all familiar with these types of ads on TV. Also, if you conduct any search online for medical device and product liability and attorney, there are thousands of results in fractions of a second. And there is, as I said, a massive treasure trove of public information about potentially defective drugs and devices. So again, recalls, warning letters, adverse events. And we regularly conduct surveys of our defense attorneys. And two-thirds of them have consistently stated over the course of multiple surveys that in some or most of their cases, the plaintiff became attracted to or aware of a potential cause of action because of an FDA enforcement action. People see these commercials, they see news reports about recalls, and it triggers them to say, well, I had that issue too. All right, our next topic is commercial conduct. So your operations as a company, your liability extends far beyond just your product itself. So remember label versus labeling, there's so much more that goes into it. So advertising is a critical issue here. Any extension of the claims beyond your product's indication or potential misrepresentation can lead to product liability claims. You also need to be careful of off-label promotion, particularly if it's something that has CMS reimbursement. That's where you can see massive penalties for off-label promotion. If there's any sort of overpromising or minimizing of risks, that can create risk. Remember your sales rep. Their statements are considered labeling, so they really need extensive training on your product and clear parameters about what they can say because they are walking labels. We also advise you to implement the AdvaMed Code of Ethics for operations with providers in your operations. That can be another helpful measure in terms of properly advertising your product and proper interactions. And remember that you always want to give a balanced view of both what your product can do as well as the risks associated. Remember, you will be judged against your market competitors. So you always want to meet or exceed any market standards for labels and warnings. And particularly for startups, you have some risks that don't necessarily apply to larger companies or companies that have been around for a long time. Again, remember that FDA compliance does not mean you are protected from product liability risk. Compliance is the floor, not the ceiling. Remember that systemic failures are the main driver of claims, not one-off mistakes. So focus on the quality of your QMS and listen to any of the warning signs that it is providing for you. And remember that there are some unique challenges for young companies. So you could have potentially an untested QMS, an immature QMS that may leave you open to some of those more systemic issues. Because there can be a heavy reliance on third parties, you need to focus on your contracting and ensuring that you are shifting risk to any of your partners as much as possible. And there are unique pressures that come from having investors. You have to deliver for them. And it can often cause companies to try to rush to market when really it may behoove you to take a step back and make sure that you are focusing on quality over speed, because in the long run, that will help you ensure that the product that you're putting out there and the reputation that you're developing is going to put you in a strong position going forward. And that is about it. We are just coming up on the hour. Were there any questions before we wrap up? If not, I will turn it back over to you, Max.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. And if there are any other questions, please feel free. I see Kate's email is up on the screen now, so please feel free to either email her, or myself, and we'd be happy to answer them. So if that is all, we will be sure to email out the webinar recording as well as any other materials. But thank you all for attending, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at Resi San Diego. And thank you again, Kate.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Bye.